In 2023, gamers all over the world were glued to their screens as they watched the Xbox showcase where Bethesda Game Studios proudly presented a 30+ minutes overview of their next big game, Starfield. Many promises were made, many mechanics, locations, features, and story elements were shown. The hype was exactly where Microsoft and Bethesda wanted it to be. Even some of the hardest skeptics were impressed. Maybe not convinced, but impressed. Then September arrived and suddenly everything became clear. Bethesda did not lie. Gamers lied to themselves. Not because they were foolish, but because they interpreted value that was never actually promised. Starfield ultimately received mixed reviews, average user scores, and one criticism appeared again and again: wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle. That is when the post-purchase value argument began to surface. Players were told to invest 10 hours, then 15 hours, then 20. They were assured that beyond a certain point, a certain level, or a certain story segment, the game would finally reveal its true value. Yet there was a problem. It required consumers to buy the game first. So how do we analyze this strange pre-purchase versus post-purchase paradox? It is actually quite simple. Before purchasing the product, consumers make a decision based on the value they believe exists inside that product. After purchasing it, they evaluate the value that actually exists. In other words, pre-purchase decisions are usually driven by subjective value. Post-purchase verdicts are usually driven by objective value. A simple example: The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild offers both subjective and objective forms of value. The Zelda IP itself represents subjective value. Some players love the visual design, the atmosphere, the characters, and the identity of the franchise. Others do not. A consumer can simply look at Zelda and say, "This isn't for me," and that is perfectly reasonable. But the gameplay itself represents something different. The exploration systems, environmental interactions, freedom of movement, and player experimentation combine into an experience that remains highly unusual even years after release. That value is much more difficult to dismiss, not because everyone must enjoy it, but because it offers something genuinely unique. You will not find the Zelda IP outside of Zelda. Likewise, you will not find the exact gameplay experience anywhere else on the market. Similarities may occur, unique value does not. This creates an interesting paradox. A player may refuse to buy Breath of the Wild because the franchise itself offers no subjective value to them. Yet, if that same player is somehow convinced to try it, they may quickly discover objective value that they failed to notice beforehand. The opposite can also happen. A player may love an IP, a developer, a setting, a franchise, only to discover after purchase that the product itself offers little objective value. This does not mean that pre-purchase value cannot be objective, or that post-purchase value cannot be subjective. Both forms of value can exist in both stages. But in most cases, consumers purchase with their emotions and attachments, while judging with their experience. And this brings us back to Starfield. The game presented enormous pre-purchase value, Bethesda's reputation, the legacy of Fallout and Elder Scrolls, trust in the studio, trust in the directors, trust in Microsoft financial backing. The showcase itself was convincing, the presentation was polished, the scale appeared immense, and players naturally began filling gaps with their own expectations. Many expected sentient alien civilizations, many expected revolutionary exploration, many expected a true space opera. Many expected discoveries that would constantly surprise them, yet none of those things were actually promised. Players simply assumed they were inevitably inside a game of that scope, and that is where the disconnect occurred. The pre-purchase values were real, the expectations were real, but for many players, the post-purchase values failed to justify those expectations. And that is precisely why understanding the difference between pre-purchase and post-purchase value is so important, because consumers do not buy experience, they buy expectations of experiences. In the entertainment industry, pre-purchase value signals are often the easiest to manipulate and exploit through marketing. Among the three consumer types, Type 1 consumers are generally the easiest to attract, primarily because they respond strongly to branding, familiarities, and recognition. A story may receive widespread criticism for its writing, yet the Disney logo attached to it may still convince children to ask their parents to invest their time and money into the product. Another story may be exceptionally well written, offer memorable characters, and provide a remarkable experience, yet remain almost invisible simply because no recognizable brand stands behind it. But trust is never endless. Type 2 consumers, despite their optimism and tendency to avoid risky investments, eventually stop responding to branding and familiarity signals when their expectations repeatedly fail to match the experience. After several disappointed purchases, the Type 2 consumer begins to lose trust in the brand. Winning that trust back is possible, but it often takes time. Type 3 consumers place significantly less weight on branding and familiarities. As a result, the pre-purchase values they seek are usually more objective in nature. The challenge for a Type 3 consumer is not to locate the true objective value of a product before purchase, because doing so with certainty is often impossible. Instead, they attempt to identify potential objective value, or very often, the lack thereof. In the pre-purchase stage, every entertainment product is effectively trying to answer a few simple questions. What does this product offer that I cannot find anywhere else? How does it connect with me emotionally? Does it fill a missing gap in my entertainment needs? For products that are not attached to an established IP, the task becomes more difficult, but also more liberating. For example, imagine that I am responsible for developing the next game in the Zelda franchise. At the same time, I have designed a genuinely unique horror survival gameplay system that I believe would work exceptionally well in a video game. If I decide to create a Zelda horror survival game, I immediately face a challenge. Longtime Zelda fans may struggle to recognize its pre-purchase value because it conflicts with what they expect from the franchise. Consumers who are unfamiliar with Zelda may simply be confused. Many players might eventually recognize the objective value of the gameplay after purchase. Unfortunately, weak pre-purchase value may prevent that discovery from ever taking place. Now let us imagine a different scenario. I am no longer constrained by the Zelda IP. I create a completely original horror game. The gameplay remains exactly the same. However, I now lose two important sources of pre-purchase value: the Nintendo brand and the Zelda identity. As a result, I must communicate the value of my game much more carefully. I know the gameplay contains objective value. The challenge is convincing consumers of that fact before they purchase it. My chances of success increase because the product no longer conflicts with an existing IP. However, poor marketing can still prevent consumers from recognizing its value. Now let us imagine a third scenario. Instead of creating a Zelda game, I am developing the next Dead Space title for EA. Suddenly, the situation changes again. Type 1 consumers immediately recognize value in the Dead Space IP. Type 2 consumers become optimistic because of the franchise's history and EA's recent successes with single-player experiences. Only the Type 3 consumer remains unconvinced, requiring evidence for gameplay, systems, and unique features. In this scenario, I have removed no value. I have only added more. Notice something interesting. In all three examples, the gameplay remained identical. The objective value never changed. It existed from the very beginning. What changed was the pre-purchase value surrounding it. The branding changed, the expectations changed, the familiarity changed, the perceived risk changed. Yet the gameplay itself remained exactly the same. This reveals the true purpose of the pre-purchase value. It does not create the product's value, it creates access to the product's value. And if that access fails, many consumers will never reach the post-purchase stage where the real evaluation begins. That said, what we can conclude with relative ease is that regardless of whether our first impressions are ultimately correct or incorrect, it is our interpretation of a product's pre-purchase values that determines whether a purchase takes place. Only after the purchase can we properly evaluate the full value of the product from beginning to end. But if we never move beyond the pre-purchase stage, we will never have the opportunity to do so. An interesting example comes from recent cinema. Furiosa, the spin-off to Mad Max Fury Road, was generally well received by many of the people who actually watched it. Critics and audiences often praised its action, performance, world building, and storytelling. Yet the box office result failed to reflect that reception. Why? Because post-purchase value and pre-purchase value are not the same thing. One possible explanation is that an important pre-purchase value was missing. Mad Max himself, that absence did not automatically make the film bad. In fact, many viewers enjoyed it. However, adding one valuable element does not always compensate for removing another valuable element. Another possible explanation is trust. Consumers have seen similar situations before. Franchises removed or replaced central pillars, promise a worthwhile replacement, and sometimes fail to deliver. Whether fairly or unfairly, those experiences influence future purchases decisions. Every disappointing experience weakens trust, and trust itself is one of the most powerful pre-purchase values in the entertainment industry. Furiosa may very well be an excellent film, yet excellence discovered after purchase cannot help consumers who never entered the product in the first place. In gaming, consumers often tolerate a weak story if the gameplay itself offers sufficient value. We have all heard the remark, "The story is terrible, but the gameplay is amazing." In cinema, that becomes much more difficult. A film does not possess gameplay. The story, character, spectacle, atmosphere, emotional engagement, and world building must carry the entire experience. As a result, consumers engage with a film pre-purchase stage almost entirely through the promise of a story-driven experience. Gaming has two major pillars capable of attracting consumers into the product: story and gameplay. Cinema mostly has one. This brings us back to Furiosa. The film may have delivered considerable post-purchase value to many viewers who watched it, yet it struggled to communicate sufficient pre-purchase value to a large portion of the market. The story itself may have been well written, the action may have been excellent, the world building may have remained faithful to the franchise. But a story that is good is not necessarily a story that consumers want. That distinction is crucial. Consumers do not purchase stories because they are good. They purchase stories because they believe those stories contain value they personally want to experience. And if that value is not successfully communicated during the pre-purchase stage, many consumers will never enter the product regardless of the quality waiting for them on the other side. Correctly and truthfully communicating the value of your entertainment product during the pre-purchase stage is essential if you want consumers to move forward to the post-purchase stage. But be careful, if you successfully convince consumers during the pre-purchase stage, yet fail to satisfy the expectation created by the values you promised, the consequences do not end with a single disappointing purchase. The next time you present a product, one of the most important pre-purchase values may no longer be there: trust. And once trust disappears, even future promises become more difficult to believe. Every showcase becomes more difficult to sell. Every marketing campaign becomes less effective. If the market reacts positively, the signal should be amplified. If the market reacts negatively, the signal should be investigated. Not because the market is always right, but because the market is always communicating something. Perhaps the value is absent. Perhaps the value exists, but has not been communicated properly. Either way, the signal matters. Because the pre-purchase stage is where consumers decide whether to enter the product, and the post-purchase stage is where they decide whether it was worth entering at all. Eventually, the market will reveal the answer. The only question is whether creators choose to listen to the first signals or wait until it is too late.